Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive, presented by Super Draft. Looking forward to breaking down this 10-game slate we got going on today, and joined today by Adam. Should my money share? Adam, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty good. Pretty fun 10-game slate. Got the article written a little bit earlier today, but yeah, a lot of stuff to talk about. A lot of not that many moving parts as far as injuries that we're waiting on, but several teams missing players. A lot of just really good matchups too.
Definitely, yeah, we got some good ones today, and we have a couple guys that have already been ruled out. So got some value that's opened up, which is nice because there have been a few slates recently where it's been a little bit tougher to find those guys we can really lock into our lineups and feel good about. So looking forward to breaking this one down. Before we get going on the game-by-game breakdown here, guys, if you could hit that thumbs up button, appreciate that greatly. That gives us a positive encouragement we need to be able to give you our best predictions. And also, we're brought to you today by Super Draft. So if you haven't played on Super Draft yet, it's a lot easier to build a lineup and a lot more fun because you don't have to worry about adding up all the salaries of players. Instead, it's all on the back end with their multiplier. So if you pick a superstar like Harden, you're not getting very many fantasy points for each play. But if you pick some low-tier player like maybe a Jordan Bell, they're getting like 2 times as many fantasy points for every bucket. So it adds a whole different level of strategy. Make sure to check them out tonight. Super Draft's lock is 30 minutes later than Draftkings and Fanduel lock tonight at 7:30 Eastern. So after today's live before lock, we're going to be talking some Super Draft, and you can use the promo code Awesemo21, get 50 free on your first deposit of $50 or more. All right, so the first game we got up today is Atlanta and Washington. And I know you're a Washington Wizards fan, and I saw that Top Shot you bought earlier today. A Bradley Beal, was it a game winner?
Yeah, against Dallas last year. I was at the game, drunk, doing something on my phone and missed it. So now I can just replay it whenever I want.
Nice, man. That's crazy that like you weren't watching when the game was on the line. Like, were you making a light swap?
Probably. I don't remember. I just remember they were in a timeout and I started doing something on my phone and then the whole place just went nuts and I realized I hadn't looked up in time.
Yeah, I can picture that. It's like D'Angelo Russell ruled out. It's like, oh, snap. And then the game's over. Sorry, he's not actually ruled out tonight in case there's confusion there. All right, so we got Davis Bertans and Rui Hachimura back for the Wizards tonight, as well as Westbrook, who sat out the last game for rest. So let's start off with Westbrook because he kind of was on this minutes limit last game, played about 28. After 2 days rest, are you expecting him to go back to a season average of 35, or is it just going to be one more game until he gets there?
Yeah, I think it's kind of tough. We haven't gotten any news that I've seen from Scott Brooks yet. I mean, he played about 25 minutes 2 games ago, played 28 minutes last game, and then rested on the second half of the back-to-back. I think a safe projection is probably like 30, 31 minutes, but I think there's definitely at least the potential for him to play more, sort of similar to like what we were getting out of John Wall yesterday. I'm not sure where Wall ended up, but I know he played 17 first half minutes kind of out of nowhere. It wouldn't be surprised if we don't get any news on Westbrook's minutes. I don't think it would be surprising to get his 34, 35 minutes like normal. I think it would be pretty aggressive to confidently project that. But if we don't hear that he's limited, I think it's firmly in the range of outcomes at least, which makes his price tag very appealing.
Yeah, I agree. I think like he's intriguing tonight because his price has dropped a tiny bit to 9K on DraftKings, 9,600 on FanDuel. And that adds a little bit of value there. And to me, it's like, it's pretty rare you see a guy that's minutes limit is 30. I feel like at that point, it's like pretty much like they don't have a limit. So
right.
I'm looking forward to seeing what happens tonight. I think Westbrook's kind of intriguing for that reason.
The other thing too, and I mean, it's kind of narrative-y, but also I think it makes sense. The Wizards like need to win games. Like it's getting kind of like embarrassing to watch. Bradley Beal's losing his mind to the point where like you feel bad for him. If the Wizards are in this game down the stretch and the intention going in was for Westbrook to play 30 minutes. I don't think Scott Brooks is taking him off the floor and saying like, "Hey, sorry guys, we're going to lose this one too." Obviously you can say what you want about whether Westbrook being out there actually makes them more likely to win, but I don't think that they're going to worry over a couple of minutes if this is a competitive game. So that probably works in his favor too.
Man, that implication there, that's tough to hear, but I guess Westbrook hasn't been shooting well this year so far. Maybe that's the understatement, but
yeah. And he has a tendency to take shots away from Bradley Beal late in the fourth quarter as well.
Well, you hate to see it, but maybe for fantasy, we get those last points we need from Westbrook tonight. Now, how does this affect Beal in your opinion?
I still think Beal's a really good option. It obviously pulls him down because he's playing with Russell Westbrook as opposed to playing with Raul Neto, but and the salary is expensive. So in the context of the entire slate, I can see how maybe you go to some other guys like James Harden, for example, is not really much more expensive. I think he's only $100 more on DraftKings, but even in the games that Beal has played with Westbrook this year, he's got a usage rate around 38%. He's averaged over 1.4 DraftKings points per minute. I think that Westbrook being back probably drives Beal's ownership down. Westbrook being back combined with the number of really, really good plays on this slate. So still, I think a pretty strong tournament option, just not the kind of guy that's going to show up in optimal lineups for you because, you do have James Harden, you do have Doncic, you have a lot of guys priced up there with Beal.
Fair. Yeah, I think that with some of the injuries that have been popping up, we got better superstar options elsewhere. Now on the Atlanta side, we got Cam Reddish, I think is probable for tonight's game. So the team is getting back healthy. He played the last one too, but we saw last game, they went into overtime. There were some big performances. Clint Capella was one guy that he had been wilding out, you could say. Got his salary all the way up to 10K on FanDuel. And the last game, he didn't play quite as many minutes. So are there any guys on Atlanta you're feeling today?
I like Young and I like Capella to different extents. I think Trae Young is still underpriced on DraftKings specifically. He's priced up on FanDuel, but 9,100 for him in this matchup against Washington. Second least efficient defense in the league, fastest pace in the league for Washington. Also a really or bottom third of the league in pick and roll defense where Trae Young basically does a lot offensively. So I think it sets up really well for Trae Young. There's a lot of top end options, but I think Young looks really good. Capella, purely a tournament play, I think. But the reason I'm still interested, for one, the matchup against Washington is obviously good, but I think that as far as his rates go this year, his rebounding rate is up from last year and his block and steal rates are up. But I actually buy into them because if you look at his numbers without Westbrook last year, 24% rebounding percentage without Westbrook on the floor, 5 steals plus blocks per 100 possessions, which is right about the same as what he's averaging this year, averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. All that stuff is the same as this year. So I do really buy into his per minute production. The one spot where I think that you do see a pullback is you're getting these games for a while where he was playing 38, 39 minutes, and that caused his price to go up as well. I don't think you see too many of those. I think he settles into like the 34, 35 minute range, but I think the rates are legitimate. I think the production is legitimate, and obviously nobody's rostering him at this price point. So, again, kind of like I was saying with Beal, not going to be someone that you prioritize. Like, for example, if you end up in this price range in cash games, you're just going to Joel Embiid for $500 more on DraftKings, for example. But in tournaments at right now, 2.5% ownership on Capella, there's no reason he can't give you a ceiling game in a great spot against Washington.
Definitely, yeah. His price is pretty high right now. I'm a little spooked that he didn't play that overtime, but I mean, it could have been the matchup where Jeff Green was playing center for Brooklyn. But, I mean, he's been on fire aside from that one. So definitely worth taking some looks at. Indiana at Charlotte. Last game, we had Jeremy Lamb enter the starting lineup for the Pacers. He took the place of Doug McDermott, who went back to the bench. Jeremy Lamb only played like 20 minutes. It was pretty disappointing for all of us who saw that he's starting and swapped onto him. So what does Jeremy Lamb kind of being back to health do as far as your interest with the Pacers?
I think it's a kind of interesting bounce back spot for him. Not a priority at all on this slate with so many good options. But if you look at the game flow from that game, I don't think the plan was for Jeremy Lamb to play like 20 or 21 minutes. The second unit got hot. Doug McDermott played more minutes than normal. TJ McConnell played the entire fourth quarter. I think that, if the second unit doesn't get hot, you get those fourth quarter minutes from Lamb. And more often than not, you're going to get like 27, 28 minutes out of him. He's close to a fantasy point per minute guy. The price tag's probably about where it should be for him, but there is an opportunity for a third scorer here. Like Sabonis and Brogdon are obviously going to carry the load, but there is no Oladipo, there is no Warren. There is a role here for Jeremy Lamb, who is a capable scorer, to kind of step up and play a big role in this offense. So I think that he's a guy that'll fit reasonably well in the tournament lineups. Relatively low floor, but and not a great value. But I think that he is a little bit underpriced.
Nice. Yeah, I like Jeremy Lamb tonight as kind of a contrarian play. If he does play well, he has that path being the starter to the big minutes. And he's a pretty good rebounder for a wing. So he does fill up the stat sheet a little bit. Now, the guy that I keep fun to in my lineups is Sabonis. He's been fantastic as far as assists, usage, rebounding all year. And then you take Oladipo out of the lineup, and we can't expect that to go anywhere but up potentially. So do you think Oladipo being shipped off affects Brogdon and Sabonis?
Yeah, I think that it should benefit both of them. The minutes obviously are great regardless, but there's more usage now to go around. You had Oladipo with around the 25% usage rate this year. I think that as far as prioritizing Sabonis is kind of site dependent. On FanDuel, I think he looks fantastic at $9,000. DraftKings a little bit more difficult because what DraftKings did, and we'll get into it more when we get to these specific players, but DraftKings has kind of lowered the pricing on a lot of their centers because there are so many good high-end centers. They've kind of driven the price down so that you get a more interesting decision point between them and then like the superstar guards and stuff that are a little bit more expensive. But by doing that, even though Sabonis is underpriced at $9,200, he's only $200 less than Embiid. He's only like $900 less than Nikola Jokic, who both of these guys just produce at a higher rate than Sabonis does. So I think that while he's still a good play, especially because you do get power forward eligibility and not just center eligibility, in the context of your entire lineup on DraftKings, there's going to be some guys that look a little bit better, whereas on FanDuel, he just stands out as a clear top option.
Nice. I think, Sabonis, he plays 37 minutes a game on the season almost, so I'm not afraid of playing 9,200 on DraftKings, but you're right, 9K on FanDuel is even better. TJ McConnell's my favorite 3K player. That's 4.7K today. Other than that, I'm not seeing anyone else. Do you have any love for the other Pacers?
No, I kind of did the same thing. Like when I realized how many minutes McConnell's been playing, I was like, man, why did I not notice him today and like write about him in the deep dive? And then I realized it's because he's almost 5K. So Miles Turner would be like the only other spot because he has been playing more minutes and he's been really productive, but he's kind of just priced at a point where it's really, really difficult to go to him. Like if I want to gamble on a mid-range center, I think that there's a couple that are a little bit cheaper that I can go to. And then for not that much more money, I can get to guys that I really, really like.
Nice, man. On the Charlotte side, Cody Zeller is the guy we got to really talk about because he had been working his way off of injury, playing from the bench with Biombo starting. Last game, Cody Zeller starts. He puts up a monster fantasy performance at dirt cheap prices. Today, again, he's really cheap at 4K on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. So we're going back to the well here.
I think that he's one of the better point per dollar options. The thing with Zeller is it's not like he's a bad fantasy producer. If you go back to last season, he's around the fantasy point per minute. The issue is just the opportunity cost. So, I think that in cash games, he's going to open up a lot for you. He's fine in tournaments as well because it does open up stuff like Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Trae Young, whoever you want to go to outside of the center position. But looking at ownership right now, I do think one way, just, quickly looking at ownership, that you'll be able to be contrarian in tournaments is if you do pay up for one or both of your centers, because Zeller is getting close to 30% ownership right now. Knowing that close to 30% of the field is using a center spot on Zeller, it just naturally is going to mean that a lot of the other centers that have, slate breaking upside aren't getting quite as much ownership as they normally would. So I think Zeller's fine. Obviously you can make really high upside lineups using your center position on Zeller, but it is one spot where you can get a pretty significant leg up on the field if Zeller happens to only get 20 fantasy points for whatever reason, and people gave up that center spot for him. If you're able to get to like an Embiid or a Jokic in his place.
Definitely. I think you make an interesting point about how you can only have 2 roster spots for centers, while other positions have many more on DraftKings. And that's something we see, we kind of quantify in the boom bust tool on the site, where it comes into play in ownership, where a guy that's center only may have lower ownership, especially in FanDuel, but it also affects their chance of being in the optimal lineup because they're competing against all those other centers. So we have Zeller at a 28% chance of, 28% ownership and 24% chance of being the optimal lineup. Not bad odds, but nothing you gotta just slam into your lineup today, even though he's a great price. Now, the other guy I'm kind of looking at on Charlotte as a primary play is Gordon Hayward. He's been playing a ton of minutes. He's averaged 38 over the last 5. He does a little bit of everything for the Hornets. Not a guy that is like a top fantasy option normally, but he's 7K on DraftKings. How are you feeling about Hayward tonight?
Yeah, I think he looks decent. There's a couple small forward options I like a little bit more in that price range, but for someone averaging about 35 minutes a game and over a fantasy point per minute, Hayward still looks pretty good. So no issues getting him for me.
Nice. Now the guard rotation has been pretty frustrating all year with Graham, Rozier, and LaMelo Ball, where Ball has the path to minutes if he's playing real well, but a lot of times he'll play like 20 minutes. So very high variance situation, I think, where it kind of is something maybe you're interested in tournaments, because you obviously like are only concentrated on nights where they're killing it. And if LaMelo Ball goes out and he's like getting a ton of stats, he may play those extra minutes. So how are you feeling about Ball or the other guards?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in LaMelo here. It's a point that I know I've heard you make several times on shows, but it kind of combines with a point that I've been making a lot recently, is that I like kind of taking shots on guys in tournaments that are really good per minute producers, but that have questionable minutes, because I know if LaMelo gets 26, 27 minutes, he's going to pay off the salary. Like, it would be really surprising if he doesn't. And to the point that you make a lot, the correlation basically between LaMelo playing well and LaMelo getting more minutes. If he's playing really well, it's pretty unlikely that James Borrego just takes him off the floor and sends him back to the bench. If he's playing well, there's a really good chance that you get that 26, 27 minute game. And if he's not playing well in his first 20 or 21 minutes, he probably wasn't going to win you anything anyway, so who cares? So you get that going for you. And then just in general with plays like this, the best time to go to them is, kind of when it feels the scariest. Like, if you look at the recent games, he hasn't been playing a lot of minutes. That's why the ownership's coming down. That's why the salary's coming down. But if he were playing well and the ownership for some reason were still coming down, the ownership would be through the roof. But now you're just getting it where there's not to say there's no risk, because there clearly is, but it's just kind of like all upside here. If he gets to his season average in minutes even and gets like 24, 25, he's averaging over 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. There's just not really guys in that price range that give you that same kind of just tournament winning upside at that price.
Definitely. Yeah. We have him at 3% ownership on DraftKings and optimal lineup chance of 5.5%. So this is one of the guys you can go to at a low percentage to get some leverage. You probably want 1 or 2 of these kind of guys in your lineups if you're building a really strong lineup. So someone I'm looking at. And if you want to go for the correlation play, you got to buy the top shot. Hope he has like a legendary game, and then you can flip it. All right. On next game, we got Sacramento and Toronto. Sacramento won in blowout fashion last game, which was a little frustrating because Marvin Bagley was their top fantasy producer, and he like played the least minutes. So I'm like, what is going on here? But he seems to have earned a little bit more trust from the coaches, averaging 30 minutes a game over the last 5 compared to 26.4 on the season. And that kind of fits in our category of a high variance player. So is Bagley someone you're going to go back to tonight?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because Luke Walton had said before that game that he wanted to switch his rotation up a little bit, and then all that changed was that he went back to not closing the game with Marvin Bagley. So it is frustrating. Hassan Whiteside's back as well. I think there's a non-zero chance that Whiteside doesn't play tonight just because Toronto has Boucher as the backup, and it's a small backup center situation, in which case that would also benefit Bagley. But even if Whiteside plays, you could get closing minutes from Bagley. Last game, Halliburton closed over him, and obviously that can happen again. We've seen plenty of games this year where Bagley doesn't play as much as we want, but overall, he's been closing more often than not recently. The salary is still pretty cheap, so it does factor in some of that risk. And he's about a fantasy point per minute player with the ability to play 30 to 32 minutes here if everything goes well.
Nice. I like that. He's been in a lot of tournament winning lineups recently, so I don't think he'll be sneaky at all, but I think a solid play. Now, what about the other guys? Fox, he looks a lot cheaper on FanDuel than DraftKings, but he played monster minutes recently, so that was encouraging given that he's only averaged 32 on the season. So I guess he had a little bit of injuries over the course of it, but he seems to be full health. He's pretty expensive on DraftKings at 8,500. But what do you think on FanDuel 7,900?
Yeah, I like the FanDuel price point. It's really difficult to get to on DraftKings. To your point about the average minutes, he was on a minutes restriction when he first came back from his injury, but now you're pretty consistently getting like 34 plus in competitive games. So I think he's a good play. Much easier to get to on FanDuel though, I think.
Nice. And we got to look at some of these multipliers. So on Super Draft, it's a multiplier between 1 and 2. Tyrese Halliburton's at 1.95, which is about as high as they come. And he's no bottom tier player like that. So I'm kind of like feeling him on Super Draft. 4,800 on DraftKings and 5,400 on FanDuel looks decent. How are you feeling about Halliburton tonight?
Yeah, Super Draft, it's great. I think he's pretty much like where he should be on DraftKings and FanDuel, I think, because there's risk, but there's also upside at that price. You only have to go back one game to see him close and play 30 minutes, but you have to go back like 3 games to find him playing 24, 25 minutes. It's kind of similar minutes-wise to LaMelo Ball, where the range of minutes, he's not as good a per minute producer as Ball, but kind of the same thing. But on Super Draft, where you're getting close to 2x, there's not a whole lot of risk there.
Nice. You guys, I forgot to mention our NBA projections are free today, so make sure to hit up awesemo.com and I'll post the link in chat here. And these are the projections we're using every day. I mean, these are my personal projections that I'm using to play all these high stakes tournaments and everything. Not just slapping my name on them. Trying to do my best Laffy impression here. On the Toronto side, we got Pascal Siakam came back last game. OG Anunoby, I believe, is still questionable for tonight. With OG out, we saw Norman Powell get most of the minutes. But I'm kind of feeling the pricing on this one with Lowry, Van Vleet, and Ciacom all between 7 and 8K. Now, Sacramento, we talk about a lot on the show, is a pretty good matchup. What are you thinking?
Yeah, pretty crazy pricing on DraftKings here for the Raptors. There are a lot of underpriced players on DraftKings today compared to, we've had pretty tight pricing over there in general, but Lowry's cheap, Siakam's cheap, and Van Vleet's cheap. All 3 guys produce at a similar rate. They average similar minutes as well, between 34 and 36 minutes. So there's not a big difference between them, I don't think, but as far as, just kind of whoever fits into your lineup, I think all 3 look good. Sacramento's been the worst defense by far in terms of efficiency this year, even much worse than the Wizards, which is hard to do. And they also played a top 10 pace. So there's really no reason not to like Toronto here, particularly the main 3 guys that are priced down.
Nice. We have a super chat from Charlie. Thank you, Charlie. He says, hey, Alex and Adam, can you rank these guys for DraftKings GPP? All right, get your pencil out. Mai Oni, Bol, Kevin Knox, and Facundo Campazzo.
I'll take the one that's going to play minutes and go with Knox number 1, I think.
I don't know. He only played like 8 minutes last game. I might go with Campazzo. But Oni should get some minutes with Mitchell out. Anyway, I'm sure this is just a troll question. So between Lowry, Van Vleet, and Siakam, do you have any particular preferences?
Not really. Like they're just so similar in terms of production. I think it really just kind of comes down to, do I need a forward? Do I need a guard? One thing to I guess point out on DraftKings is that Lowry is the only one of the three that does not have multi-position eligibility. So he'll just be a little bit tougher to get in the lineups than Van Vleet, who has, point guard and shooting guard. But I think that they're more or less the same.
Nice. Now, if OG is out, would that change your opinions on anyone?
It would make Norman Powell look better. I mean, Norman Powell played 40 minutes last game without OG. I still don't think that would be what you expect. I think you probably expect around 34 minutes if OG's out. Powell's price has come up, but it is a really good matchup. So he'd definitely, still be in play if OG is out and he gets the start.
Awesome. And one guy who we'd be remiss not to mention is Chris Boucher. He saw his minutes pinched the other night. He's averaged 21 over the last 5. Which has been disappointing because earlier in the year he was playing 28, 29 minutes in some games, but he's a per minute monster when he's on the court. So I'm sure that fits your category of guys that when they're good, they're real good. But is that someone you're going to prioritize tonight?
Prioritize, no, because the floor is basically non-existent. But I do think that this is the kind of spot where you could see Boucher just have a monster game because, White, so we mentioned it when we talked about Sacramento. I think there's a non-zero chance that Bagley just gets the backup center minutes over Whiteside, in which case that would be great for Boucher because the game's just going small. But even if it doesn't, I think Boucher can be out there for Whiteside's 15, 16 minutes without a problem. And if he's playing well, you're probably going to get more minutes. I'm not 100% sure, but I think when we had that like 5 or 6 game stretch where Boucher was going nuts, I think that kicked off with a matchup against Sacramento where Boucher took advantage of the small Sacramento front court and had a monster game. It's tougher on DraftKings since he's only a center, but he is only 6,100. So in tournaments where you're more concerned with your ceiling than, kind of your medium projection, I think he is one of these mid-range guys that I don't mind taking a shot at, because if he does manage to get 28 minutes, he's probably scoring 40 plus raw points, which is really what you're looking for here. So I think, like, for example, someone like the first name that comes to mind in this price range is Steven Adams, who's probably a little bit underpriced for his medium projection. But I think that Chris Boucher is the guy that gives you that better chance of just putting up a score that wins a tournament. And that's obviously what I'm interested in, especially with people being off of him.
Nice, man. I think I'll just settle for the cash and not go for the win tonight. All right. So guys, before we get to the next game, I got to mention that you can sign up for all of our premium tools for Awesemo Plus for $29.95 for a week. You get player projections, ownership, Slack, and a lot more. And then if you just want the NBA membership, that's $16.95 a week, or you can even go express for like $4. So make sure to check out the Awesemo Plus memberships on the site. And guys, I forgot, we're getting close to 50K subscribers. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. That'll let you know when we go live with all this great TFS content. All right. Cleveland at New York. Now, Andre Drummond played 28 minutes and got 60 fantasy points last game. Now, like, that was ridiculous, right? Like, I'm kind of intrigued because he had been playing a little bit with Jared Allen on the court at the same time, but that didn't happen at all last game, despite the fact Larry Nance was continuing to be out. So are you less excited about Drummond tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't overly excited about him last time, but Nance, so like you said, we didn't get any minutes of him alongside Jared Allen last time. Drummond played 28, Allen played 20. If they were going to play them alongside each other with Nance out, I think it's more suitable to do it against this New York front court with Robinson and Randall than it probably was against Detroit. So maybe you could see a couple minutes there. It's not something that I would be super confident in. But Drummond, has been really, really productive this year on a per minute basis. It's just a matter of his playing time being down with Jared Allen there. This game is likely to be a very slow game as well. Both these teams in the bottom 10 in pace. Should be plenty of rebounding opportunities. Both teams play well defensively, but I think it's obviously tough to get to Drummond when, for example, he's only $600 less expensive on DraftKings or $800 less expensive. Sorry, than Joel Embiid. The upside's clearly there. It's just, you're not going to get too many 50 or 60 fantasy point games from someone playing 28 minutes.
Definitely, yeah, that was an outlier. It was a revenge game, so we can't get that factor working in our favor tonight versus the Knicks. Maybe trying to find a new home game for next year. But another popular player from the other night was Darius Garland, whose minutes restriction was lifted. He had been playing about 33 minutes a game, but now Cleveland has a lot more bodies, but they are still weak at the point guard position in particular. So you mentioned how this game is pretty slow paced and the Knicks have been solid on the defensive end. So I'm not seeing a ton of value here, but are you going to take some stabs on Garland?
Yeah, I think Garland and Sexton are both guys you can take stabs at, especially if you're playing a lot of tournament lineups. They're not going to be priorities for me just because there are so many fast-paced games that look really good on this slate, and there's no real shortage of underpriced guys. But, Garland he is a productive enough player. You're probably getting around 32 minutes from him. Sexton, you're probably getting 34, 35 minutes. Usage rates near 30% this year. So both of those guys clearly are capable of having better games than their salaries indicate, but this is a Knicks team that plays at the slowest pace in the league and is one of the more efficient defenses. So it's definitely not a spot where I'm super excited to get to either of them.
Same. Yeah, the Knicks side doesn't look that great either. I mean, both of these teams have improved this year, particularly on the defensive end. So the Knicks, I mean, RJ Barrett played a ton of minutes last game, but I'm kind of worried his minutes are going to go down now that they got Burks healthy. Today, Reggie Bullock's coming back, and then you have Austin Rivers, who's also been playing big minutes. So now that Bullock is back, who do you expect those minutes to come from? What are you expecting from the Knicks rotation?
Yeah, so this will be the first time that we've actually seen this fully healthy rotation. And to your point, I think at the very least, you get a lower minutes floor from guys like Barrett and Randall. My best guess is that their average minutes come down a little bit, still probably getting 34, 35, but, probably fewer of those 39, 40, 42-minute games we were getting earlier in the season. And probably more like at the beginning for most of the season, it's kind of just been like you're not getting less than 35 minutes from those guys unless they get in foul trouble or something like that. Now I think you're just going to have some random games where they play a lot less than we're expecting, because there are more bodies available. With Bullock being back, what we were seeing before was him and Burks basically splitting minutes, and prior to that, Bullock and Rivers basically splitting minutes. I don't know exactly how it's going to look now, but my best guess would be that Kevin Knox gets squeezed and you get you get Barrett being backed up by Rivers, or Bullock, however you want to phrase that. But I think it's just kind of Bullock probably doesn't play a ton of minutes, but he probably plays more than Kevin Knox has been.
Yeah, I think the minutes are a little bit tricky here. Maybe laying off Alec Burks and Bullock could be a good idea, as well as Rivers. We got an update from Charlie in chat. He says Kevin Sadler is -1 so far this weekend. So that's going to really affect our approach for NBA tonight. The memes that this show has developed here. It's hard to even keep track of them all. All right, so maybe we get some Kevin Stadler top shots this weekend. But Elf Payton versus Quickly. Quickly has been like having some huge games, but his price has come up. I'm just not seeing it today. Do you have any interest?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite LaMelo Ball situation.
Nice. All right, let's move on to the next game then. Milwaukee at New Orleans. No injuries here except Lonzo Ball is questionable tonight. So that could lead to Nickeil Alexander-Walker getting a start. He's pretty cheap tonight. So let's start with the Pelicans side. If Ball is out, would you be rushing to get Nickeil Alexander-Walker into your lineups?
Yeah, I think he ends up looking like one of the best point per dollar values if Lonzo's out. He started 3 games this year. He's averaged about 29 minutes per game, and I would expect him to get 28 to 30 minutes at least if he starts tonight. This game has a 230 total. Pelicans 7-point dogs, so there should be plenty of possessions here. The Bucks play at a top 10 pace. They're a good defensive team, but the possessions are important, especially for someone like Alexander Walker. It is kind of interesting that his rates when he in the 3 games he started are actually high. He's got a 24% usage rate in those 3 games, but overall this year when he's played alongside Ingram and Zion, he only has a 15% usage rate. So I think he'll benefit from, assuming he's going to have his minutes staggered with Eric Bledsoe and play with the second unit. But at his price point, there's just not a whole lot of downside, I don't think.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. I think that he'd be one of the best players of the slate, especially when we have Bruce Brown drawing massive ownership right now and they play the same position. All right, so Ball, I feel like he doesn't really affect the other guys on the team, especially because Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a pretty high usage guy. So would it change your interest in Ingram or Williamson?
It doesn't really change anything in Ingram or Williamson for me. I think they're good plays with Lonzo. I think they're good plays without. The pricing is just probably a little bit inexpensive. Both guys average about 1.14 DraftKings points per minute, 34, 35 minutes per game for both of them. Ingram does a better job in the way of peripherals. Zion, you get a lot of those like empty, 28, 30 point real point games where he ends up with like 38 fantasy points. But both guys are priced, at a decent point. One guy that I do think Lonzo affects is Bledsoe, just because of his minutes. It's not that he's going to get a huge bump in usage without Lonzo or even in assists because Ingram's so involved there. But it's just easier for Bledsoe to get 32, 33 minutes if Lonzo's out than if he's in. So I think Bledsoe does gain value if Lonzo sits, not to the extent that someone like Alexander Walker does for 1,500 less, but Bledsoe does look better if Lonzo's out.
Nice. Yeah, he should get extra minutes, and that could really elevate his fantasy production. Now, what about Ingram and Williamson? Are they priorities for you tonight, or are they just some more guys that are in the mix?
Yeah, more like secondary options for me. I think that they're both in the mix. Like you mentioned Gordon Hayward at 7K. If I can find the money, I think I'd rather get to Ingram or Zion. But again, it's not like it's a huge difference between the two. But there's also some other guys at their positions that we'll get to, and I think even better spots or price points.
What about Steven Adams at 5K on FanDuel? He looks really cheap over there.
Yeah, he's definitely underpriced. I didn't really even know how to talk about him in the deep dive today because there's a pretty low chance that he quote unquote fails at that salary, but he's just also like, he's a low usage guy that you also don't get the double bonus on FanDuel. Like if he goes and gets, 14 points and 12 rebounds or something like that and scores 30, 35 fantasy points, but you're not rostering any of the centers that score 60. I don't really know how much that helps even at his price point. So I think he will be probably more valuable. Like for example, if Lonzo's in and you lose the Alexander Walker value, then maybe Adams becomes a little bit more viable. But if you get good value at like the guard or forward positions, I'd be trying to get to an actual high upside center.
Yeah, he makes a good value one, but not an exciting player. Got a super chat from Timothy Talion in the chat. He says he plays a 1650 tournament on FanDuel, the baller. And he says, it seems like you build your lineup somewhere between cash and GPP. Any tips on the high dollar 100 person tournaments? I would say that the ownership on the chalk plays goes way up. And that squeezes the ownership of guys that are kind of like in that second tier of maybe like the 10th to 20th most popular plays of the day. So you can get a lot of leverage in those by going to some of those guys. If you want to know who's going to pop in the lineups in the 60 and 50, just run a fantasy crunch with some projections. Like players in those tournaments are much more projection oriented. That's going to get you kind of to figure out who's going to be in their lineups. So that's how I approach that. All right, on the Milwaukee side, we got, Giannis and Middleton are always pretty good options this year, but they play anywhere up to 36, 37 minutes in a competitive game now. So that is an improvement over last year. But I don't see any particular motivation to go to them tonight. How are you feeling about spending up to get Giannis?
I think that, right now we have Giannis at like 6% ownership. It's always interesting because like you have a lot of players that project for, on average, like 1.6 DraftKings points per minute. And in a lot of cases, it's because someone on their team is out. But that's just what Giannis averages in general. 34 minutes per game over his last 10, about 33 per game for the season. And at power forward, which isn't quite as strong a position as center or as the guard spots, if he does stay that low owned, I do have interest in tournaments just because it is Giannis. He always has one of the highest ceilings on the slate. But I'm not, it's not someone where like if I were playing 150 lineups, I wouldn't expect to be getting like 40% Giannis or something like that.
Nice. We have some breaking news here. Isaac Bonga is not starting tonight. It is Jerome Robinson and Rui Hachimura. Now, Hachimura would be interesting, and if he wasn't coming off COVID, but I kind of feel like we gotta lay off at least a game and see what happens. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't feel confident in Rui getting enough minutes to be someone I really want to roster. Jerome Robinson also priced up on DraftKings and obviously going to lose usage playing alongside both of Westbrook and Beal. If you wanted to take a shot at Robinson, he is still 3,600 on FanDuel. I doubt that he's really like a worse play than Bruce Brown, for example. But, it's still I think a lot of Robinson's value will probably be derived from whether he gets to play with the second unit or not.
Definitely, yeah. He's not that great a player, especially next to Beal and Westbrook. So that second unit usage would be important. So maybe starting. Yeah, he gets more minutes, but it's not necessarily a great spot anyway. All right. What about the other guys on Milwaukee, like DiVincenzo, Holiday, Lopez? They all seem to not be particularly great fantasy options, but do you see anything tonight?
So one more thing real quick on Washington. Scott Brooks says Rui Hachimura, Mo Wagner, and Davis Bertans are ready to play, quote, good minutes, but not, quote, full minutes tonight. I don't know what that means. I assume it's just basically what we were expecting, mid-20s or something like that. So take that for whatever it's worth. As far as the Milwaukee guys, I don't think that their priorities, Middleton and Holiday or DiVincenzo. DiVincenzo's FanDuel price at 4,400 is really nice, but they are guys where I think naturally their ownership's just going to be a little bit low because there's better point per dollar plays at their respective positions. This is a game with a 230 total. Both of these guys, Middleton and Holiday, are playing 34, 35 minutes. Middleton, I mentioned in the deep dive today, the Pelicans have allowed the most 3-point attempts per game. Middleton leads Milwaukee with 6 3-point attempts per game. He also has a 44% 3-point percentage this year. So maybe you get a couple extra looks from Middleton. Both just purely tournament options, I think. But it is a game that should be high scoring.
Nice. Yeah, I think this one, if it's competitive, I mean, Giannis is always exciting, and he fills a role where you can kind of spend on all the values to get him. The other guys a little tougher to get to, I think, but on FanDuel, it's better pricing. Now, let's go to Philadelphia at Minnesota. Philadelphia, Joel Embiid is questionable. It's hard to really read into the questionable tags these days because teams liberally apply them. And I've noticed that with Embiid. Do you have any insight to if we should expect him to play, sit, or what?
My guess is that he plays. My guess 2 games ago was also that he would play, and he didn't. One thing to keep in mind, though, is in the games he's missed this year, Dwight Howard has been the starter in his absence. I'm expecting it to be Tony Bradley today if Embiid sits. Bradley started the second half without Embiid last game, and after the game, Doc Rivers said that he had switched it because he wanted Dwight Howard to keep playing with the second unit, and basically said that he regretted starting Howard. So my guess is that Tony Bradley would start, and Bradley is only 3,600 on DraftKings. So that is one thing to keep in mind too. Like, for example, we had talked about the Cody Zeller ownership earlier. Because you can late swap, there's the potential for you to get the same if you don't have Zeller lock in that early game and then we get late news. It's obviously a risk, but there's the potential for you to be able to get that same sort of build as the Cody Zeller lineups, just with a much lower owned version of Cody Zeller.
Nice. Yeah, so Tony Bradley and Dwight Howard could be interesting if Embiid sat. Got a super chat from Josh, and he says, give me 2 guys on DraftKings you feel like are coming under-owned that could land in the optimal. So I think the Boom Bust page is excellent for identifying these plays. Adam, I'll throw it to you. Who's one guy that you feel like is coming in a little bit under-owned?
LaMelo.
Nice, LaMelo. Oh, that's a good one. I have the top one as Bradley Beal. So he's super low owned at 5%, and Westbrook's back, but he's still been tremendous this year. So I think he's not going to be prioritized enough by the field. All right. So the pricing on Philadelphia looks pretty good, especially Minnesota is not a great defensive team, and they also are a very bad rebounding team, which should allow some extra boards, especially to the good rebounders on Philadelphia. How are you feeling about the team as a whole here versus Minnesota?
Really, really good. This is another team. It's kind of similar to Toronto, where I don't know what's going on with the pricing here, but they're priced basically at the same spots that they were against the Lakers last time out. And it made sense against the Lakers because the Lakers are the best defense in the league. Minnesota, on the other hand, fourth fastest team in the league, fourth least efficient defense. So you just get a great spot here for Philadelphia at really cheap price tags. Embiid's the one that I've already referenced several times as standing out at 9,400 on DraftKings, 9,800 on FanDuel if he's available. Expecting to get 32, 33 minutes out of him. He's averaged about 1.6 DraftKings points per minute this year. You're not paying that much for him. And so he looks really good. But then even Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris, I think, are underpriced. Ben Simmons, someone that I normally absolutely hate, but you're not really paying. A lot of times I think that you're kind of paying a premium on Ben Simmons for his name as opposed to his fantasy production, but that's not the case now. So with his price tag coming down below 8K on DraftKings and having that guard forward eligibility that makes it really easy to get him in the lineups, the fact that he's like a 20% usage guy where you're hoping for, a 12, 11, 10 triple double really isn't a problem now that the salaries come down. And then it's a great matchup against Minnesota. Same goes for Harris, who's averaging over 1 fantasy point per minute this year and should play 34, 35 minutes. So I think those guys look good. And then one other player that I don't think is getting much ownership right now, but that I'm really interested in. We have him at about 10%, but Seth Curry's salary has basically gone through the floor. He's down to $4,400 on DraftKings. He played 30 minutes against the Lakers last game, and he actually dealt with some first half foul trouble. It looks like he could have played even more than 30 minutes. He's averaged 29 minutes per game for the season. The Sixers wings are healthy, so his minutes floor is lower than normal now that you have Milton, Maxey, Tybal, and Korkmaz all healthy. But I think that if the game goes according to plan, you're probably getting at least 29, 30 minutes from Seth Curry in a great matchup against Minnesota. He's not a high usage guy, but he's one of the best shooters in the league. So he doesn't need a ton of usage, and he does get enough assists to, kind of help you out as well. So someone that I think, maybe going a little bit overlooked as far as value plays, given the matchup and given his normal role in this offense.
Definitely. I think that's a solid call. Seth Curry at a very cheap price point, getting the start. Got some news that Reggie Bullock's out. Not huge, but updated the projections, which are free today, so check those out. I agree that Philadelphia is one of the best teams to target today. Now, FanDuel, one guy stands out in particular. Danny Green is 4K. It's Danny Green, but he's been playing way more minutes recently, it feels like. Is that enough to entice you at 4K?
Yeah, it's fine, especially because he's a small forward. If he was a shooting guard, I'd feel a little bit differently. But it's basically with Danny Green, you're hoping that he runs into some defensive stats and that he shoots better than normal from three. Minnesota definitely gives you the opportunity for both of those things. So, that's working in his favor.
We got a super chat from CS111. He says, gents, two goats. So tons of guys in the $6 to $8,700 range with lots of upside. What do you think about 1 to 2 value guys with the rest filled with this price range instead of paying up for the really expensive guys?
I think on bigger slates that becomes more viable just because there's more mid-range guys to choose from. So there's a better chance that a couple of them have monster games. The thing that concerns me here is that the pricing on the top tier guys is down. Like if, for example, Luka and Jokic and all these guys were like 11K or 11.2, and it was actually going to force you into some questionable cheap guys, then I would be more interested in going with the mid-range guys. But the fact that you can get, 60, 70 point upside from Jokic for $10,100 or from Embiid for 9,400, I think that they're just priced a little bit too close to the 7 to 8K guys for me to feel really good about going that route, especially if you're talking about foregoing all of the top tier. I think maybe getting to one of the top guys as opposed to two is viable, but not having any of those top guys, I think is pretty risky.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of great high-priced guys tonight that you can go to, especially Harden, who I'm looking at 10K. But, I think you can make lineups that are good without playing players from that range. It just wouldn't be a priority for me to attack it that way. All right, on Minnesota, a tougher matchup versus Philadelphia, especially if Embiid plays. D'Angelo Russell is questionable today. If he was out, maybe it gets interesting. Let's talk about if he's in. Is there anyone on the team that would be a priority for you?
I don't really think there's anybody that's a priority either way. But if he's in, he is favorably priced on FanDuel at 7,500. I don't know if he'd be on a minutes restriction or what that minutes restriction would look like. But if Russell were in and not limited, I think that's a good price point for him. 8,200 on DraftKings is also fine, but I think a little bit tougher to get to, especially when you consider some other guard options. So not really a priority, but if Russell's in, I think that the FanDuel price is nice. If he's out, you would most likely get Ricky Rubio starting again. He still wouldn't stand out as a top option for me in this matchup, assuming he's probably not going to play more than like 28 minutes. Malik Beasley would be the guy that I think looks the best if Russell's out, but I still wouldn't call him the priority just because there's a lot of guys that I like more.
Yeah, I think there would be some interesting options. Jordan McLaughlin played a lot of minutes last game. I know Steve was mentioning him as someone to target if Russell's out. He played 26 last game. And then we had Anthony Edwards kind of have a breakout game last game with Russell out with 25 points. That being said, the injury for Russell is a quad contusion, which is just a bruise in layman's terms. So, like, how many games can he miss with a bruise to his quad? I mean, maybe it was really bad, but I'm also kind of intrigued by Rubio, but I think he had COVID, so he hasn't really been the same since.
Yeah, and I'm with you on Edwards too, as far as because if Russell's out, you also have Jarrett Culver out, and that's one of the guys that at times can kind of take a couple of minutes away from Edwards. One thing to point out from that last game, he played 32 minutes. He did sub in earlier in the second quarter than normal because Jared Vanderbilt was in foul trouble and Ed Davis had already been ejected, so they were pretty shorthanded there. They ended up having to kind of slide guys down a position. So I think they got a couple more minutes than normal for Edwards. But if Russell's out, I would expect, 27, 28 minutes from Edwards.
Nice. Actually, I would take back what I said about Rubio. I don't think he was out long enough to have had COVID, but the minutes have been kind of low. All right. Moving on, we got Brooklyn at OKC. I think Brooklyn is probably the team to target today, where we have KD out for rest, and that really opens the door for Kyrie and Harden to have that kind of usage you need to be a top-tier NBA fantasy scorer. So with the KD out, how are you tackling this team?
Yeah, so I mean, it makes Irving and Harden just look a lot better because I would be absolutely shocked if their minutes aren't staggered. So essentially, you're assuming that about 33% of the minutes they play is going to be by themselves. Like, there's not another high usage guy on this team other than the two of them, and then the other 67% are alongside each other. But when you're taking Durant's usage out, that's still going to give a bump to Irving and Harden even when they're on the floor together. For example, Harden last year playing alongside Westbrook averaged about 1.55 DraftKings points per minute. I think that's a reasonable comp for what to expect from him alongside Irving. Irving, should probably produce around 1.2 to 1.3 fantasy points per minute when he's out there with Harden, and then he's going to push 1.4 to 1.5 without him. So it's a bump for both of those guys, and their prices have started to come down as a result of losing usage when Durant is on the floor.
Definitely, yeah. I think that. It's common sense and borne out in the numbers that these guys are way better with KD off the court. So I think that they're both intriguing, and they've both been playing huge minutes, despite the overtime kind of amplifying the effect even more. So I'm expecting big minutes. Now, Bruce Brown's super popular today. It's kind of been it's kind of unexpected to me that his rebounding numbers this year have been very good. He's averaging 16% defensive rebounding and 7% offensive rebounding. It's like a Russell Westbrook light almost. So, is that just a fluke, or is he just like a great rebounder now?
Probably a fluke, but he has always been a decent fantasy producer in general. My biggest concern with Brown, outside of the fact that it's Bruce Brown and he's right now the highest owned guy on the slate, the last time Brooklyn played, we have one game of Brooklyn playing with Harden and Irving active and without Durant. Bruce Brown started and he played 23 minutes, which for 23 minutes isn't great anyway, but also about 2.5 of those minutes were in garbage time. He had subbed out and wasn't closing in that game. The closing lineup was Jeff Green, Luwawu Cabarrot, Harris, Irving, and Harden. Not to say that's a guarantee that it happens again tonight. Like, you definitely could just get 26, 27 minutes from Brown at minimum salary would be really nice. But there's at least I think, some downside risk here that maybe the field isn't factoring in enough if he's going to be that popular. Like TLC can play more minutes. Jeff Green can play more minutes. You could see DeAndre Jordan close. He's typically gotten more minutes when Durant's out. There's just a lot of interchangeable bodies on the Nets to where I agree that Bruce Brown does have a clear path to success, especially at the minimum salary, but there's nothing that suggests he has to play big minutes here to the point where, you expect him to get more than like 20 fantasy points.
Yeah, I think that 20 fantasy points is a pretty reasonable expectation. He's 3K. I think that's what's really driving the ownership on DraftKings.
Yeah. Also, guard and forward eligibility just makes it really easy.
Yeah. So that really helps you get some of the other studs. But you're right. He didn't close that last game, except for the garbage time. It was TLC playing over him. It's just going to be whoever's playing the best, I think, of the wings. So with Bruce Brown being super chalky tonight, that is a red flag, but still someone that I think really helps you build a strong roster.
Yeah. And also with there being 10 games, like there's definitely, you can, as far as building a strong roster, you can just eat it on Bruce Brown, hope for the best. And there's a million other spots where you can find contrarian plays. So it's definitely not like you have to look and say, oh, he's popular, I'm not going to play him. I just think it's kind of an interesting point where the downside is, relatively low. And also even looking at another 3K guy here in Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot right now getting 18% ownership to Brown's 35. I think their range of outcomes is almost identical.
Well, yeah, TLC's, I don't think he's as good a fantasy producer. He doesn't really rebound or get assists. So that's kind of why I'm looking at Bruce Brown, is like that rebounding, but I'm not really confident that it's going to be sustainable. All right, on the Oklahoma City side, we got George Hill continues to be out. So I saw in chat the mention of Theo Maledon, who got the start last game and then played big minutes. Is that what you would expect again today?
I expect him to start. He played 21 minutes 2 games ago without Hill. He played 29 minutes last game, I believe. You can kind of cut it in half and expect like 25, 26 minutes, I think. The concern for me is that he hasn't been a very good fantasy producer this year. He's about 0.65 fantasy points per minute. But again, it's a Brooklyn team that plays fast. They don't play much defense in general. And now they're also missing Kevin Durant. So they should be playing even less defense. It's the same thing as Bruce Brown to me. It opens up a lot. There's no guarantee he does well. There's no guarantee he plays more than 22, 23 minutes. But there is just a lot of value in getting a player around $3,000.
Yeah, definitely. So not the most exciting guy, but he does fill that void. And compared to Bruce Brown, like, he's a little bit more expensive, but about the same expectations, where he maybe closes if you're lucky. And then the rest of the team looks pretty solid, I would say. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is always a great high upside fantasy player, and he never really gets the salary up too high. While Bazley is kind of an up-and-coming talent. And Dort, I know, is one of your favorite players from what I've seen on Twitter. So are you going to be rostering any Thunder tonight?
I think it's a good spot. I don't think any of them stand out as like top options, just compared to other players. Gilgeous-Alexander clearly has 50+ fantasy point upside. He's been great this year on a per minute basis. And if the game's competitive, he should get 34, 35 minutes. The thing that makes it difficult is just his price point. It's pretty expensive on a slate where there's a lot of underpriced guys. I think I'm more interested in going to a couple of the cheap forwards and just kind of hoping for the best in a good matchup here. Bazley being one of them. You're expecting around 30 minutes from him. He's averaged a little over 0.8 fantasy points per minute this year, but he does have the best rebounding rate on the team outside of the center position, and he's definitely someone that can go out there and get you a double-double. We've seen him in some competitive games get 33 minutes this year as well. And then you mentioned Dort. It's kind of similar to, not that it's the same player, but I kind of feel similarly about him as I do Seth Curry. I feel a little bit better about Curry, but Dort has actually been a lot more productive this year than he was last year. At least he's averaging about 0.78 DraftKings points per minute, 60% true shooting percentage. I don't know if that's real. I mean, it's 10 points higher than last year, but it is fully possible that he's just improving. But this is a spot where it just sets up really well for a 3-and-D guy like Dort, I think, because he should get open looks against a weak Brooklyn defense that plays fast. But also you could potentially get a couple more minutes from him, considering Brooklyn's going to have James Harden or Kyrie Irving on the floor for all 48 minutes. Dort's the number one guy on this team that you would expect to be out there defending James Harden, defending Kyrie Irving. So I think, the most likely outcome is that you get around 30 minutes for Dort, but it's not like it would be surprising if you go back and look at this game after and Dort played more minutes than we expected.
Yeah, that's a good point. They might really need him over Diallo out there. So Dort, it could be an interesting play today. All right, guys, before we hit these last 3 games, make sure to hit the like button. Appreciate that a lot. Also, Michigan sports betting is now legal. Head over to our Awesemo odds Twitter handle and check out the pinned tweet there. A bunch of deposit bonuses, and you might as well claim some free cash, pad your bankroll with some of these enticing offers the casinos are offering. So hit up Awesemo odds. All right. The last 3 games, we got 15 minutes, so we got to be quick. Clippers at Orlando. Now, Kawhi and Paul George were surprisingly active today, and that pretty much makes the whole team a fade for me, given Orlando is kind of a tough matchup. Is there anyone on the Clippers you'd be interested in?
Not really. This is one of the least appealing teams on the slate to me, with George and Leonard coming back. Obviously, George and Leonard are both really good and give you high ceilings, but it's just, I think, pretty close to impossible to prioritize them over a lot of the other 9 to 10K players on this slate. And then beyond them, with them coming back, you have, the pricing went up on the entire rest of this team while George and Leonard were out. So it's basically easily my least favorite team tonight.
Same. The interesting thing, if you were able to predict this news, you could have gotten a really good bet because the line went from -3 in favor of Orlando to +6.5. So it shows if you can guess these injuries, you can make a bunch of money. On Orlando, we have Gordon and Vucevic being the primary fantasy values. Now, Gordon is someone who's really intrigued me because they've removed Jordan Bone from the rotation as the backup point guard. Now Gordon subs in when Cole Anthony subs out, and his assist rate has gone up a lot. Of course, when he was chalk last game, he just absolutely stunk. So I think I'm going back to the well. Do you see any additional value now that this rotation has changed, where he's playing backup point minutes?
Yeah, the assist percentage is great this year, up over 22%. Should increase, like you said, because of that rotation. I think on FanDuel in particular, he's 6,300. You can expect mid-30s in minutes from him, assuming this game's competitive and that he's not in foul trouble or anything. So it is a tough matchup against the Clippers, and obviously that gets tougher with George and with Kawhi coming back. But at the same time, Aaron Gordon probably is going to be needed to defend one or both of those guys. So maybe you see the minutes tick up a little bit as well. I think that 7,100 on DraftKings is fine. There's guys I like more, like Simmons or Tobias Harris, the first 2 that come to mind. But on FanDuel for 6,300, I think it's a really good salary.
Nice. Yeah, I think that he's really easy to get on FanDuel. I think I want to go for it again, even though there's a sour taste in the mouth. Now, what about the other guys on the team? Cole Anthony has kind of gotten some trust from the coaches. His multiplier at Super Draft is 1.95, so maybe I'll have him on the 7:30 Super Draft slate. Any love for Cole Anthony?
Not really. I think he gets hurt by Gordon coming back. His usage rate in the games that he started since Fultz's injury drops 4 or 5 points when Gordon plays. You also have Fournier back now as well. I think that if it were a smaller slate, maybe I would take some shots at Anthony, but on a slate this big, I would just rather go to somebody like LaMelo Ball at basically the same price.
Nice. We got a super chat from Blaine. Blaine is one of our guys who does the tennis projections for the site, and he says it's back Sunday. So make sure if you're a tennis fan to check those out. They are free on awesemo.com. We got OG Anunoby is ruled out. So let's go back to Toronto real quick. Powell's price has gone up to 6,200. I feel like that's too rich for me. Like, what do you think?
Sorry, I didn't hear you asked about.
OG is out, so yeah. Norman Powell is probably going to get the start, but he's 6,200. So is that a high enough price tag that you're not going to really change your strategy tonight?
Yeah, it's not going to change too much for me. If he plays 40 minutes again, he'll probably do well. But assuming he plays like 34 or 35, I think it's just kind of marginal.
Nice. All right. Saw some news about Alonzo. Game time decision, won't have a minutes limit if he does play, so that is encouraging. Back to the games, we got Denver at San Antonio. Denver, Jokic has always been, I mean, he's one of the leading candidates to be MVP this year, so a tremendous player. Now, San Antonio's been a little bit faster and not as great at defense with some of the young guns coming into the team. Does that mean Jokic is going to be a priority tonight?
Using priority loosely just because of how many really good players there are at the top, I think he is one of the best plays on the slate. The salary's down to 10.1. He's been great this year. We're over a month into the season now, and Jokic is still 7th in the league in potential assists. He's basically the only 6 players he's behind are basically the like 6 of the best point guards in the league. And then you have Nikola Jokic. He's 8th in rebound chances per game. He also has a usage rate around 30%, and he's still averaging over 35 minutes per game. So yeah, I love Jokic. How much of him you can get to kind of just comes down to also liking a lot of other players. But I think absolutely one of the top projected guys on the slate.
Definitely. I think that Jokic is an easy guy to play, except for the fact that, I mean, there's a lot of options at that range. So fantastic play, particularly on DraftKings. And then on Super Draft, only 1.05 multiplier. In NBA, I think it pays off to go for the high multiplier. Guys, we'll go over that after the main slate locks. Any other guys in Denver you're interested in?
Not really. Porter coming back takes minutes away and usage away from the second unit. And then Jamal Murray is like the one guy in addition to Porter that has the talent to have a really big game because he's such a good scorer. But the combination of Jokic playing more minutes this year and just being so involved in everything is hurting Murray. The usage is down, the assists are down, and his per minute production obviously is down. So that kind of similar to like Cole Anthony, how I felt about Cole Anthony, just where like if this were a 5-game slate, I'd be a lot more interested in taking a shot on Jamal Murray. But on a slate this big, it's not really that hard to be contrarian without going that far down the board.
Agreed. Now on the San Antonio side, DeJounte Murray is a fantastic fantasy player. He rebounds, gets assists, and scores. So I'm a little bit surprised that he's only $6,100 on DraftKings tonight, but that's kind of enough to entice me to play him a good amount. How are you feeling about DeJounte Murray?
Yeah, I love him here. I really have no idea why his price is where it's at. He's averaged 1.2 DraftKings points per minute in the 13 games that he's played with both of DeRozan and Aldridge this year. His rebounding percentage in those games is up around 13%. Usage rate is about 21.5%. He gets assists as well. Derek White's still out, so the minutes should be there. Excluding the game that Murray played 1 minute and then got hurt, he's averaging about 32.5 minutes per game. So yeah, I really have no reason not to like DeJounte Murray at $6,100.
Same. He's going to be a core piece tonight on DraftKings, especially, I mean, those 6K players are pretty easy to fit in any lineup. What about the other Spurs?
I think DeRozan on DraftKings is a little bit underpriced as well. Not to the extent maybe that Murray is, but you do get the Ford eligibility, which is pretty valuable. And I mean, it's just he's averaging 34 minutes per game in the games where San Antonio has been healthy. He's averaging about 1.15 DraftKings points per minute. He's in that same kind of conversation with Gordon Hayward, with Tobias Harris, I think.
Awesome. I like DeMar DeRozan as well, a little bit underpriced. And on FanDuel, I'll throw out some love to Lonnie Walker and Keldon Johnson, being pretty reasonably priced. Let's hit this last game, and then we got live before lock coming up after us. Dallas at Utah. Dallas has had some of their guys come back. Josh Richardson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Dwight Powell are all back from the COVID list. That hasn't really changed a lot for me. I mean, Luka is always a good option, pretty much regardless of who's in or out for Dallas. So does that continue to be the case for you?
Yeah, it just makes it so like the only two things I'm interested in are Luka and then obviously to a lesser extent, but Porzingis. As far as the rest of the guys, I don't really see anything at all.
Yeah, I agree. If Josh Richardson and if we had confidence that he was back to full minutes, he'd be a little bit intriguing, but coming off this COVID list, it's a little bit hard to anticipate that, I think. On the Utah side, I think this is one of the teams to target tonight because Donovan Mitchell continues to be out. So I'll just let you run with this one. Who are your top targets from Utah?
Gobert, Clarkson, Conley, Ingles, Bogdanovich. It's basically the starters plus Clarkson and minus O'Neal. We also were waiting for news on Derek Favors, which doesn't sound important, but he sat last game, and as a result, Rudy Gobert played about 38 minutes. Gobert is typically playing 31, 32 minutes this year, so will be interesting to see if Favors is in or out. But either way, at Gobert's price, especially on DraftKings at 7,500, he's going to look really good regardless. Usage goes up a little bit without Mitchell. Actually, in 3 games since last year without Mitchell, it's at like 24%, but I don't expect that to hold just because of the type of player that Gobert is. But he's averaging about 1.2 DraftKings points per minute anyway. Mitchell being out definitely shouldn't hurt him. The matchup against Dallas is fine, so I like him a lot. Clarkson, price tag came up a little bit, but played about 32 minutes last game without Mitchell. Dallas's second unit has also just been getting shredded recently. Clarkson last game, Michael Porter Jr. a game or two before that. So definitely some potential there. Mike Conley's still underpriced for his role without Mitchell. The one negative thing I have to say about Conley is that I was hoping we would get a couple more minutes from him last game, but we didn't. He still played about 30 minutes. That's what he's been averaging this year. So a good play, just had the potential to be a great play if he'd come out and played like 35 minutes. Ingles' salary came up a little bit, but still should play around 30 to 31 minutes. And then Bogdanovich played 35 minutes last game. Yeah, I don't know if we get that again, but certainly the potential for him to play a couple minutes more than normal. Usage should go up without Mitchell as well. I think he's behind guys like Clarkson, Gobert, and Conley, but certainly still a pretty decent option here.
Something I'm seeing in this rotation from last game that was very intriguing is Jordan Clarkson was balling. So as a result, in the first half, Mike Conley came back in with 1.5 minutes left to go, a lot later than he would normally come back. So maybe is that an indication that he didn't play his full minutes?
I think that's possible. Game? Yeah. I hadn't noticed it till now. And the thing is, like, Conley and Clarkson can play together as well. Like, I think there's a lot of games, especially if the Jazz were behind, where I think you probably get a closing lineup that has Conley and Clarkson together instead of like Royce O'Neal or Ingles. So yeah, I think that's certainly possible that maybe, you can get 33 minutes out of Conley or something like that.
One of the intriguing things about this last game is Rudy Gobert led the team in usage, which was really shocking to me because he's not a high usage guy normally. So do you think there's anything to that? Should we expect him to continue jacking up a ton of shots?
I don't expect him to, especially because, you do have other guys out there that are high usage guys. Like even going back to last year, for example, Bogdanovich has like a 27% usage rate without Mitchell on the floor. We know Clarkson's a high usage guy. So is Conley. Gobert's just not the kind of guy that normally you're like running your offense through a lot. So much of his usage just comes, from putbacks and stuff like that, that I don't anticipate it staying that high. I think maybe you see it increase a little bit from where it normally is, which given how efficient Gobert is still a big deal and still makes him a lot better play. But I'd be surprised if we get like 10 games with Donovan Mitchell out, I'd be surprised if Gobert is coming in with like a mid-20s usage rate.
Definitely. Yeah, that was a shocker. Now, Joe Ingles was the guy who got the start last game, and he had a pretty good chalk performance. He's 4,700 on DraftKings, 5,200 on FanDuel, kind of hitting that low price point that maybe you need to fill out a lineup. Are you going to go back to Joe Ingles tonight?
Yeah, I'll get to some just because the price point is still favorable. 4,700 is definitely still, like, you need him to actually have a pretty good game here. It's not like you can just go out there and score 24 fantasy points and you're happy. But I think that, the minutes should be there. The production should be a little bit higher without Mitchell. So I feel a little bit more confident in going to like Conley and Gobert. But I think as far as value goes, Ingles is still a good play.
Awesome. We got a couple super chats here, and then we'll yield the floor to Live Before Lock. We got from Abram, single entry FanDuel GPP center. Who are you looking at FanDuel at center?
Obviously a lot depends on the rest of your lineup, but I think that if you can get to Embiid at 9,800, it makes a lot of sense. And then you can, late swap if he's out and, fix the rest of your lineup then.
Awesome. I'll go with Embiid as well. Or if you want a cheap one, I think that Mitchell Robinson may be overlooked tonight. David said he's asking for his favorite or his old pal Emac, best shooting guard on FanDuel, priced between 8.2 and 8.4K. feel like this is another meme. Who is this guy that's between 8.2 and
Fred
8.4? Okay. No, that's no surprise. So make sure to check out Emacs Fred Van Vleet contest tonight. Guys, we are sponsored by Super Draft. Make sure to check them out. Their lock is at 7:30 Eastern tonight. We're going to be covering their slate right after Live Before Lock, which follows this show. And thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully we got some good takedowns brewing. And stay tuned for the next hour and a half. We got Terry and Spags taking you home.
What is up, guys? We are here for the final hour, but then another half hour on top of that for tonight's NBA slate. We'll give you the details on that in a moment coming up. But I'm Chris Spags, joined once again by a man you know and love, a man who sired our very own Josh Engelman. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
That one's just never going away, huh? I'm just stuck with that at this point.
I think it's, it's charming, really. It's great to have the father-son connection here. I don't know if you guys have done a show together, but I'm sure it would just be you giving Josh life lessons and virtual pats on the head.
Yeah, constantly. Just me doling out sage advice to the younger generation, you know. But yeah, it's good to be here with you. I appreciate you bringing me on again, and just dealing with some frigid cold temperatures here in Jersey, and getting ready to dive into this 90-minute show with you.
Nothing will warm you up faster than tonight's 10-game NBA slate. And more importantly than that, we have to give our quick shout out to Super Draft, who will be doing a half-hour show at the end. They're locked tonight, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, 4:30 p.m. here on the West Coast. And that means that we're doing a whole half hour dedicated to all the games that'll start at that 7:30 lock time on there. But make sure to go over to superdraft.io or download Super Draft in the App Store. Big difference with Super Draft compared to some of the other sites that we talk about on here is that you can play any players you want. It's all based upon their multiplier format, where you say goodbye to salary restrictions and hello to lineup freedom. We also have free projections today that includes Super Drafts. So it's going to be very easy for you to go over there and make some money tonight. Big tournaments today as well. They have a 40K guaranteed GPP, a 10K guaranteed GPP, a 5K. They also have one satellite tournament tonight where you get entered to their gigantic $1 million Super Bowl contest. Super Draft, we know the guys pretty well over there. They want you to get you guys in there, much like a lot of these newer sites that we work with. They really care about giving you guys some bonuses. Use the promo code Awesemo21 on there. You'll get $50 free on your first deposit of $50 or more. That's instant release too. Goes right into your account. You can play it. You can win it. It's yours. So go to superdraft.io or download Super Draft in the App Store. We'll be talking again a half hour tonight, going an extra half hour, talking Super Draft as along with any other news that comes out there. And we got one giveaway as well for you guys to take advantage of.